Welcome back to the channel. If you love stories of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate triumph, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an incredible story like this one. Today's tale is about a man who dedicated years of his life to building something incredible only to be stabbed in the back by the very people he trusted most. But here's the twist, he didn't go down without a fight. Stay with me because this story will have you on the edge of your seat. Now, let's dive in. Daniel Carter had always been a man of determination. From the moment he stepped into Kingston Enterprises, his father-in-law's company, he had one goal in mind, to turn it into an empire. The company had been on the verge of collapse when Daniel joined. His wife, Sophia, had urged him to help, knowing her father, Richard Kingston, was struggling to keep it afloat. Daniel took on the challenge, working day and night, sacrificing time with his family and making sure every decision he made was for the company's survival. And he succeeded. What was once a failing business was now a powerhouse, bringing in over $100 million annually. Daniel had been the architect of its revival, and he took pride in knowing that without him, Kingston Enterprises wouldn't exist today. But success comes with a cost. Over the years, Daniel started noticing something unsettling. Despite his hard work, his loyalty, and the countless hours he poured into the company, there was always a distance between him and Richard. Richard had always been a traditionalist, a man who valued blood over merit. Even though Daniel had been married to Sophia for over 15 years, Richard still saw him as an outsider, someone who had married into the family but would never truly be part of it. Still, Daniel pushed those thoughts aside. He had built everything. He had turned his father-in-law's sinking ship into a thriving empire. Surely, there was no way they would ever turn their backs on him. He was wrong. The first sign of betrayal came subtly. One day, Daniel noticed that Richard had been holding meetings without him. At first, he assumed it was nothing, maybe just a few minor discussions that didn't require his presence. But then those minor meetings started turning into strategic planning sessions. Then came the financial decisions, contracts being signed without his approval, money being moved without his knowledge. And then, the worst part, Richard and Sophia had stopped including him in family decisions altogether. It was as if he was being phased out. But the final, brutal betrayal came on a night Daniel would never forget. It was supposed to be a celebration, the 15th anniversary of Kingston Enterprises' turnaround. The company was stronger than ever, and Daniel had every reason to celebrate. He was expecting recognition, maybe even an announcement that he would finally be officially named CEO. Instead, what he got was a knife in the back. Standing in front of hundreds of guests, Richard took the microphone. He smiled as he prepared to make his big announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is a special night. Not just because we are celebrating our company's success, but because we are welcoming a new leader into our family business." Daniel's heart raced. This company has always been about legacy, about family. And today, I am proud to announce that the future of Kingston Enterprises will be led by someone who has proven himself worthy, someone who is not only a brilliant businessman but also a man who understands what it means to carry our name forward. Daniel felt a sudden chill. This company's future is in safe hands because starting next quarter, the new CEO of Kingston Enterprises will be. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Ryan Carter. Ryan Carter. Daniel's stomach dropped. Ryan wasn't just anyone. Ryan was his wife's new husband. The room erupted in applause, but Daniel couldn't hear anything. His ears were ringing, his world spinning. Sophia looked at him, her expression blank, but her eyes filled with cold calculation. Ryan, the man she had secretly been seeing, stepped onto the stage like he belonged there. He shook Richard's hand, smiling like he had just won the lottery. Daniel sat there, frozen. The company he had built, the empire he had given his life to, was being handed over to another man. A man who had done nothing. A man who had simply taken his place. Sophia hadn't just betrayed him personally, she had destroyed him professionally. But what they didn't realize was this. Daniel Carter wasn't a man who went down without a fight. They had made one mistake. They had underestimated him. And they were about to pay the price. Part 2, the plan for revenge. Daniel sat in his car that night, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The echoes of Richard's words still rang in his ears. The future of Kingston Enterprises will be led by Ryan Carter, his wife's new husband. They had humiliated him in front of everyone. They had treated him like a disposable asset, like the 13 years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice he had poured into this company meant nothing. But they had made a fatal mistake. They thought he would walk away quietly. They thought they had taken everything from him. They were wrong. Step 1. Knowing the battlefield. The first rule of war was to know your enemy. And Daniel had many enemies now. Richard Kingston, the man who had used Daniel when he needed him and discarded him the moment he became inconvenient. Sophia Kingston, the wife who had once promised loyalty but had replaced him with another man without hesitation. Ryan Carter, the outsider who had stolen what Daniel built and wore his crown like it was his to take. Daniel didn't have the Kingston name, but he had something far more powerful, legal leverage. What they had all forgotten was that he still owned 30% of the company. And while they had control now, all it would take was the right moment, the right move to turn the tide. They thought he was finished. They had no idea what was coming. Step 2. Finding weaknesses. For the next 2 weeks, Daniel did nothing but observe. He knew that coming at them head-on wouldn't work. If he stormed into Richard's office demanding his position back, they'd just shut him out completely. Instead, he played the long game. He started with Ryan. Ryan had come from a corporate background, but his business history was a disaster. His last 2 companies had collapsed and his financials were shady at best. Daniel hired a private investigator, someone he had used before for high-stakes business deals. If Ryan had any skeletons in his closet, Daniel would find them. And sure enough, the reports came back with gold. Ryan had been embezzling small amounts of money from Kingston Enterprises for months, filtering them into offshore accounts. It wasn't obvious theft, he was smart enough to make it look like normal expenses. But to Daniel, who had built this company from the ground up, the numbers didn't add up. And if the board found out, Ryan would be finished. Step 3. Letting the fire spread. Instead of exposing Ryan immediately, Daniel waited. He let Ryan believe he was safe, that he had won. Meanwhile, Daniel started planting doubts. He spoke strategically to investors, casually mentioning his concerns about Ryan's business practices. He hinted at financial instability to key members of the board, letting their own paranoia do the work for him. And then, the final blow, he leaked just enough damaging information to a business journalist he knew would dig deeper. Ryan didn't even see it coming. The press started asking questions and the investors started pulling out. The board was divided and Richard was starting to panic. And just when it looked like things couldn't get worse for Ryan, Daniel struck. Step 4. The knife in the back. 3 weeks after the public announcement that Ryan was the new CEO, the board of Kingston Enterprises held an emergency meeting. Daniel walked into that room with evidence in hand. Every stolen dollar, every mismanaged fund, every offshore transaction, all laid out in perfect order. Richard Kingston, red-faced and furious, turned to Ryan. "Is this true?" he demanded. Ryan, for the first time, looked scared. It's not what it looks like," Ryan stammered. "These numbers, this is a mistake." But it was too late. The board wasn't listening anymore. They were looking at Daniel. Daniel, the man who had built this empire. The man who had kept them afloat when they were drowning. The man who had been loyal until they betrayed him. And now he held all the cards. "I built this company," Daniel said, his voice calm, measured, powerful. "I saved it when no one else could. And now you've handed it over to someone who nearly destroyed it." The boardroom was silent. Richard was seething, his hands clenched into fists. Sophia, sitting quietly in the corner, had gone pale. Daniel looked them all in the eye. "You want to fix this?" he asked. "There's only one solution." A long pause. Then the head of the board spoke. "Ryan Carter," he said, his voice cold, "is hereby removed as CEO, effective immediately." And just like that, Daniel had won the first battle. Step 5. The final betrayal. Ryan was escorted out of Kingston Enterprises in disgrace. Richard, humiliated, tried to hold onto control, but his influence was slipping. Sophia? For the first time, she looked at Daniel with fear. She knew. She knew that he wasn't done yet. Daniel had taken the first step in his revenge. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. Because now it was time to destroy the Kingstons completely. To take back everything they had stolen from him. And this time, there would be no mercy. Part 3. Striking Back. Daniel sat in his office, staring at the city skyline, his mind a battlefield of calculated moves and cold vengeance. The first phase of his plan had worked perfectly. Ryan Carter was gone, removed in disgrace, his reputation shattered beyond repair. The same man who had taken his wife, his company, and his dignity was now powerless, left with nothing but the fallout of his own greed. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because while Ryan had been a useful pawn in this game, he was never the real threat. The true enemies were still standing, Richard, Kingston, and Sophia. And now Daniel was ready to finish what they started. Step 1. Breaking the Kingstons. With Ryan out of the picture, Richard was scrambling to maintain his grip on Kingston Enterprises. But he was losing control. Ryan's reckless mismanagement had driven away investors and the board's trust in Richard had been shaken. The company's stock had dipped and the media was circling like vultures. And Daniel? He made sure to push it further. Through quiet, strategic moves, Daniel started buying up shares of the company. He leveraged old business relationships, calling in favors from powerful investors who had once supported him. Within a matter of weeks, Daniel had secured a controlling stake. 51%. Richard Kingston no longer owned his own empire, and he had no idea what was coming. Step 2. The boardroom coup. Richard, oblivious to Daniel's silent takeover, walked into the next board meeting thinking he was about to regain control. He was wrong. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his rightful place. Richard paused, confused, as the board members exchanged uneasy glances. "What is this?" Richard demanded, his voice sharp. Daniel leaned forward, placing a thick folder on the table. "It's over, Richard," he said calmly. Richard scoffed. "Over? You think removing Ryan changed anything? This is my company." Daniel smiled. A cold, ruthless smile. "Not anymore." He slid the documents across the table. They were legal filings, proof that Daniel had acquired 51% ownership of Kingston Enterprises. The room fell silent. Richard's face drained of color as he flipped through the pages. His hands shook as he realized what he was holding. "You are..." Richard stammered. "This isn't possible." "Oh, it's very possible," Daniel said. "I spent 13 years building this empire. I know every weakness, every pressure point, every investor. You thought you could throw me away like trash. Instead, I came back and took everything." One of the board members cleared his throat. "Richard, under these circumstances, it's best that you step down immediately." Richard looked around the room, but no one defended him. Not a single person. Because Daniel had won them all over. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. Richard stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. His face was red with fury, but there was nothing he could do. He had been outplayed. And he knew it. Without another word, he stormed out of the boardroom and out of the company forever. Step 3. The final betrayal. There was one person left. Sophia. The wife who had betrayed him. The woman who had watched him suffer, who had humiliated him without a second thought. She had stood beside Ryan as they ripped away his legacy, never imagining that one day she would be the one left with nothing. Now it was time for her reckoning. That evening, Daniel arrived at the Kingston estate where Sophia was still living in luxury. She had been expecting him. The moment he stepped inside, she smirked, arms crossed. "Came to gloat," she said. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "No, Sophia. I came to finish this." She raised an eyebrow. "You already won, Daniel. You took the company, humiliated my father, and destroyed Ryan. What more do you want?" Daniel pulled out a manila envelope and tossed it onto the table. Sophia frowned, slowly picking it up. As she flipped through the pages, her expression changed. Her confidence crumbled. Because what she was holding was a divorce settlement. One that left her with nothing. "What is this?" she whispered, her hands trembling. "This," Daniel said, his voice calm but ruthless, "is your exit. You don't get a dime of Kingston Enterprises. No settlement. No spousal support. Nothing." Her eyes snapped up, pure rage flashing in them. "You can't do this." "Oh, but I can," Daniel said. "You cheated. And you think I didn't prepare for this? Every move you made, every secret meeting with Ryan, every lie, you signed a prenuptial agreement, Sophia. And guess what? That agreement leaves you with absolutely nothing if you betray me." Her breath hitched. "Daniel." "No," he cut her off. "You had your chance. You made your choice. Now live with it." Sophia's face twisted in desperation. "We don't have to do this. We can fix this. I made a mistake." Daniel laughed, a short, bitter laugh. "A mistake." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You stood beside Richard and Ryan while they took everything from me. You didn't hesitate. You weren't sorry then. You don't get to be sorry now." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please. I loved you." "No," Daniel said coldly. "You loved power. You loved control. And now you have neither." He turned toward the door, pausing only for a moment. "Oh," he added, "you might want to start packing. The Kingston estate? It belongs to me now. You have 24 hours to get out." Sophia let out a choked gasp, clutching the papers as if they could change reality. But reality was already set. Daniel walked out of the mansion, feeling the weight of betrayal and revenge lift off his shoulders. He had won. He had taken back everything they had stolen from him. And he had left them with nothing. Part 4. The First Blow. Daniel stood outside the Kingston estate, watching the lights flicker in the mansion that no longer belonged to Sophia. He had taken everything back. The company. The power. The legacy. And now there was only one thing left to do, destroy what remained of the Kingston name. Sophia had 24 hours to leave, but Daniel knew her better than anyone. She wasn't just going to pack her bags and walk away without a fight. She had spent years manipulating people, controlling situations to always land on top. But this time, there was no escape. No second chances. Step 1. The public unraveling. Sophia had lived a life of privilege. The Kingston name carried power, and she had worn it like armor, shielding herself from the consequences of her actions. She had convinced herself that Daniel was just a stepping stone, a man she could replace when it suited her. But now, for the first time in her life, she was powerless. And Daniel was going to make sure everyone knew it. That morning, the headlines broke. Kingston Empire in crisis. Power shift leaves Richard and Sophia Kingston out. CEO overthrow. How Daniel Carter took back the business he built. Corporate scandal. New details emerge on betrayal and infidelity inside Kingston Enterprises. Daniel had planned this perfectly. By the time Sophia opened her eyes, she had nowhere to run. Step 2. The fall of Richard Kingston. Richard had never lost before. He had ruled over Kingston Enterprises with an iron grip, treating Daniel like an outsider even after everything he had done. And now? Richard was just another forgotten businessman, a man whose own arrogance had led to his downfall. Daniel could have let him fade away quietly, but that wasn't enough. No, he needed to erase the Kingston name completely. So he did what Richard feared the most. He exposed everything. Using the financial records he had obtained, Daniel leaked evidence of fraud and tax evasion that Richard had tried to cover up for years. The government launched an official investigation. The Kingston name was now synonymous with corruption. And just like that, Richard's entire legacy crumbled. He had spent a lifetime building it. Daniel destroyed it in a single week. Step 3. Sophia's last stand. Daniel wasn't surprised when Sophia called him that night. She begged to meet in person. He almost didn't answer. But something inside him wanted to see her one last time, to look her in the eyes and watch her realize that she had lost everything. They met at an empty restaurant, a place they had once gone to during the good years. Sophia sat across from him, looking tired, desperate, but still trying to hold onto the last pieces of control. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. Daniel leaned back, studying her. "Didn't I?" She shook her head. "I get it, you wanted revenge. But Daniel, Stop," he cut her off. "You don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to play the victim now." Sophia's eyes glimmered with tears, but Daniel felt nothing. She had chosen her side. Now she had to live with it. Step 4. The final cut. "Give me something," she said after a long silence. "You've already taken everything else. Just give me a chance to start over." Daniel thought about it. For a moment, he considered letting her go with a small piece of the fortune. But then he remembered. He remembered every lie, every betrayal, every moment of humiliation. And he knew the answer. "You don't deserve a new start," he said coldly. "You deserve to know what it feels like to have nothing." Sophia's face twisted in anger. "You're a monster." Daniel smirked. "No, I just learned from the best." And with that, he stood up and walked away, leaving her behind in the ruins she created. Part 5. The Power Shift. Daniel had won. The Kingston name was ruined, Richard was facing criminal charges, and Sophia had been left with nothing. The empire he had built was finally back in his hands, stronger than ever. But was it enough? Daniel had spent months plotting his revenge, ensuring that every person who had betrayed him paid the price. But now that the dust had settled, a strange emptiness crept in. Was this truly victory? Or was it just another hollow success? Step 1. Rebuilding the empire. With Richard gone, Daniel officially took over as CEO of Kingston Enterprises. But it wasn't the same company he had once saved. It had been damaged, its reputation stained by Richard's greed and Ryan's incompetence. Investors were still wary, the media was circling like sharks, and the employees were divided between those who supported Daniel and those who feared change. Daniel had work to do. His first move was to clean house. He removed anyone loyal to Richard, replacing them with his own trusted executives. He restructured departments, cut unnecessary expenses, and refocused the company on what had made it successful in the first place: smart investments and long-term growth. Within weeks, Kingston Enterprises was stronger than ever. Stock prices began to climb. Investors returned, seeing the company finally in competent hands again. And Daniel? For the first time since his betrayal, he felt like himself again. But there was still one problem left to solve. Step 2. The ghost of Sophia. Sophia hadn't disappeared. She had lost everything, but that didn't mean she had given up. First, Daniel ignored her. She was nothing to him now, just another bitter ex-wife trying to hold on to the past. But then he started hearing rumors. Sophia had been meeting with reporters, talking to former employees, and trying to spin a new narrative. One where she was the victim and Daniel was the villain. It was a desperate move, but it was dangerous. If she found the right audience, she could turn public opinion against him. Daniel couldn't allow that, so he paid her a visit. Step 3. The final warning. Daniel found Sophia living in a small apartment, a far cry from the lavish Kingston estate she once ruled. She was expecting him. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice tired but still holding a hint of defiance. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I thought we were done, Sophia, but you just can't seem to let go." She laughed bitterly. "You think you can erase me? That you can just take everything and walk away like I never existed?" "You erased yourself," Daniel replied, his tone cold, "when you chose to betray me." Sophia's eyes darkened. "You always needed me, Daniel. Without me, you would have never made it this far." Daniel smirked. "And yet, here I am, stronger than ever. While you're here." He gestured around the rundown apartment. Sophia's jaw clenched. "You might have taken the company, but you'll never take my voice." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not here to argue, Sophia. I'm here to give you one last chance. Walk away. Take whatever dignity you have left, and disappear." Sophia held his gaze for a long moment. Then she smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You still hate me," she said. "But you know what's worse than hate?" Daniel narrowed his eyes. "What?" "Being forgotten." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And you'll never forget me, Daniel, no matter how hard you try." Daniel clenched his jaw. He wanted to believe she was nothing to him now, but deep down he knew she was right. She had been a part of his life for too long, a constant presence, even if it had all been built on lies. But that didn't mean he was going to let her win. Step 4. Erasing Sophia. The next day, Daniel made his move. He had been waiting for this moment, preparing for the final blow. Sophia thought she could use the media against him, so Daniel made sure no one would listen to her. Within 24 hours, every journalist she had spoken to pulled their stories. The articles she had been working on, buried. She tried reaching out to former employees, but Daniel had already warned them. Her phone calls went ignored. Her messages went unanswered. The world that had once listened to her every word now saw her as nothing more than a bitter woman clinging to the past. And just like that, Sophia Kingston was erased. Step 5. The future awaits. That night, Daniel stood in his office, looking out at the city he had fought to reclaim. For the first time in months, he felt at peace. He had taken back everything they stole from him. He had destroyed those who betrayed him. And now he was standing at the top, stronger than ever. But was it enough? For the first time, Daniel asked himself, what's next? He had spent so long fighting for revenge that he had never thought about what came after. Now it was time to find out. Part 6. The Downfall. Daniel Carter had spent months tearing down the empire that had betrayed him. Now, standing at the top, he had everything he ever wanted. The company was his again. Richard Kingston was disgraced and finished. Sophia was erased from high society, left with nothing. And yet, something felt off. For years, he had lived with a single purpose: revenge. Now that it was done, an unsettling realization crept in. What was left for him? Step 1. A hollow victory. The world had moved on from the Kingston scandal. The media had found new stories, investors had stabilized, and Kingston Enterprises was once again a thriving empire under Daniel's leadership. But something had changed. Daniel had always thrived under pressure, under conflict. Now, for the first time in years, there was nothing left to fight for. He no longer woke up with that fire in his chest, the hunger that had driven him through every betrayal, every setback. His days were filled with meetings, deals, numbers, the same things he had done for years. But now, none of it excited him anymore. Had he spent so much time destroying others that he had forgotten how to build something for himself? Step 2. The cracks begin to show. One night, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse staring at a bottle of whiskey he had barely touched. The silence was deafening. He had cut so many people out of his life during his war with the Kingstons. Former colleagues, old friends, even the employees who had once admired him, most of them had drifted away. He hadn't noticed at first. But now? Now, it felt like he had won the battle but lost something far greater. And that realization hit him harder than anything Richard or Sophia ever did. Step 3. A ghost from the past. The next morning, Daniel walked into his office at Kingston Enterprises expecting another routine day. But what he found was anything but ordinary. Sitting in his office chair, waiting for him, was a man he hadn't seen in over a decade. Michael Calloway. His former mentor, the man who had given him his first real opportunity in business. Michael had been the CEO of a major corporation before retiring years ago. He had been one of the few people who had believed in Daniel when he was just an ambitious young man with something to prove. Seeing him now after all these years felt like a punch to the gut. "Michael," Daniel said, stepping inside. "Didn't expect to see you here." Michael leaned back in the chair, studying him. "Didn't expect to be here either, Danny. But I've been watching what you've been doing." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And?" Michael sighed. "And I'm wondering if you even know what you're doing anymore." Step 4. The hard truth. Daniel stiffened. "I did what I had to do." Michael scoffed. "No, you did what you wanted to do. There's a difference." Daniel felt his anger rise, but Michael wasn't done. "I taught you how to build something great, Daniel. How to create something bigger than yourself. But what have you done? You turned your entire life into a war zone. And now that the war is over, you look like a man who's already lost." Daniel opened his mouth to argue. But he couldn't. Because deep down, he knew Michael was right. Michael stood up and walked toward the door. "You have two choices, kid. You can keep sitting in this office ruling over a company that you don't even enjoy running anymore. Or you can start over." Daniel frowned. "Start over." Michael turned back and smirked. "You tell me. What's next, Daniel?" With that, he walked out, leaving Daniel alone with a question he didn't have an answer to. Step 5. A new beginning? That night, Daniel sat on his penthouse balcony staring at the city skyline. Michael's words echoed in his mind. "What's next, Daniel?" For the first time in his life, he didn't know. But maybe it was time to find out. Part 7. The final move. Daniel Carter had spent years fighting battles, first to build Kingston Enterprises, then to reclaim it, and finally to destroy the people who betrayed him. Now he had everything he ever wanted, and yet he had never felt so lost. Michael Calloway's words haunted him. "What's next, Daniel?" For the first time in his life, he had no answer. But one thing was clear, he couldn't keep living like this. It was time for the final move. Step 1. The offer he couldn't ignore. 2 weeks after Michael's visit, Daniel received a call that changed everything. A private equity firm, one of the largest in the world, wanted to buy Kingston Enterprises. Not just a stake, the entire company. It was a multi-billion-dollar deal, one that would make Daniel wealthier than he ever imagined. For years, he had fought to control Kingston Enterprises. Now, the question was it time to let it go? Step 2. The meeting that changed everything. The deal was too big to ignore. Daniel agreed to meet with the firm's representatives just to hear them out. The meeting took place in a sleek glass skyscraper, the kind of place where billion-dollar deals were signed over expensive whiskey. The firm's CEO, Jonathan Miles, was a man who had built an empire of his own, just like Daniel. "You've built something incredible," Miles said, sipping his drink. "But I have to ask, do you even want this anymore?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't interested." Miles smirked. "You misunderstand me. I'm not asking if you want the money. I'm asking if you still want the fight. The stress. The late nights. The board meetings." Daniel didn't answer. Because, for the first time, he realized he didn't. He had spent so long fighting, he had forgotten what it meant to live. And now he had a way out. Step 3. The last conversation with Richard Kingston. There was one loose end left at Richard Kingston. Daniel didn't owe him anything, but he still wanted to see the man he had destroyed one last time. He arranged a private meeting at a hotel. Richard arrived looking tired and defeated. The once powerful businessman was a shell of the man he used to be. "You got what you wanted," Richard muttered, taking a seat. "So why am I here?" Daniel slid a folder across the table. Inside were the final details of the Kingston Enterprises sale. Richard's eyes widened. "You're selling?" Daniel nodded. "I built this company. I fought for it. But I don't need it anymore." Richard scoffed. "So that's it? You burn my legacy to the ground and now you just walk away?" Daniel smirked. "I'm not walking away, Richard. I'm moving forward. For the first time in years, he felt light as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Richard shook his head. "You're a fool." "No," Daniel said, standing up. "I'm finally free." And with that he left Richard Kingston in the past where he belonged. Step 4. The deal of a lifetime. The next morning, Daniel signed the final papers. Kingston Enterprises, his empire, his war, his past was no longer his. In return, he walked away with a fortune beyond imagination. A new beginning. A chance to live again. For the first time in his life, Daniel Carter wasn't a CEO, a businessman, or a warrior. He was just a man with endless possibilities ahead of him. And he had never felt more alive. Part 8. Victory and Justice. The papers were signed. The deal was done. Daniel Carter had just sold the very company he had spent over a decade building. Kingston Enterprises was no longer his, and yet, for the first time in years, he felt an unexpected peace settle over him. This wasn't just a financial win. It wasn't just about the fortune he had gained, the status, or the empire he had regained after years of betrayal. It was about something much more important: freedom. Step 1. The weight lifts. For years, Daniel had been consumed with fighting to prove himself, to rebuild what had been taken from him, to make sure no one could ever take him down again. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of what it all meant. Now, standing at the pinnacle of his success, looking at the life he had reclaimed, Daniel had an epiphany. He didn't need Kingston Enterprises to prove his worth. He didn't need to spend his life fighting when he had already won. Sophia, Richard, Ryan. They were gone, and now it was his turn to live for himself. To step out of the shadows of those who had used and betrayed him. The money was nice, of course. But Daniel knew that the real value of his victory wasn't in the wealth, but in the peace he could finally embrace. Step 2. A new chapter begins. Daniel decided it was time to put his plan into action. He wanted a new start, a new venture, something that wasn't tied to the business battles he had fought so long and hard. He began investing in projects that had always interested him, things that brought him joy instead of just profits. He started working with charitable foundations to help disadvantaged entrepreneurs who didn't have the resources he did, mentoring those who wanted to build something from scratch but didn't have the tools to do so. And he realized in this moment of new beginnings that his true calling wasn't about the fight anymore. It was about helping others and giving back. His days were now filled with opportunities to shape a different legacy, one that would stand for good, not just revenge. Step 3. Coming full circle. Several months later, Daniel stood in front of the Kingston Enterprises building, now owned by the private equity firm he had sold it to. He had once walked these halls as a young man full of ambition, determined to make it, willing to do anything to succeed. But now as he stood there, he didn't feel any sense of loss. He felt free. He smiled to himself, thinking about the path he had traveled, the choices he had made. There was a time when he thought he would spend his life chasing the ghosts of those who betrayed him. But now he was no longer haunted. He wasn't defined by the company anymore. He wasn't defined by his past. Daniel had found his peace. He had rebuilt his future, and now it was time to move forward. He knew that the real victory wasn't about getting back what he had lost, but about the person he had become along the way. Step 4. A letter from the past. One afternoon, Daniel received a letter in the mail. It wasn't from a lawyer or a business associate. No, this letter was from Sophia. Curious, Daniel opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the words she had written. "Daniel, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this, but I had to write it. I've lost everything, and I have no one left to blame but myself. I never realized how much I hurt you, and I can never undo what I did. But I want you to know that, for what it's worth, I am truly sorry. You were always the better person. And I hope you find the peace I never could. Goodbye." Daniel read the letter a few times, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to be angry, to rip the letter into pieces and forget she ever existed. But another part of him understood. Sophia had been broken long before she betrayed him. He wasn't going to spend his life hating her. He had let it go. Daniel folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer where it belonged, as a memory, a part of his past. Step 5. The future. With his legacy now firmly in the past, Daniel moved forward into the next phase of his life. No longer bound by the chains of revenge, betrayal, or the weight of running a business, Daniel was free to do what he had always wanted, to create something new. He started several innovative ventures, from tech startups to philanthropic projects that made a difference in the world. His story was now one of healing, not war. Of growth, not destruction. The scars from his past had faded, replaced by a new vision for his future. Daniel Carter had won. Not just the war for Kingston Enterprises, but the war for his soul. He had fought for justice, but in the end he realized it wasn't about revenge or about taking down those who hurt him. It was about finding peace, about understanding that the true victory wasn't in punishing others but in forgiving himself. The end. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. What did you think of Daniel's journey? Could you have walked away like him, or would you have taken a different path? I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you for watching.